pals, I'm here today to do my last book haul of the year. This is all books I've just picked up from the library in the last few days and haven't started reading yet, and also to talk about my kind of reading plans for the last few days of the year. So I've been really into reading kind of cosy books recently, or feeling in the mood to read cosy books. And I think a large part that's because even though this time of year is supposed to be really joyful and lovely, it is also, and mainly, I think, very stressful, and there is a lot of pressure put on it, and there is obviously, a lot of other stuff going on around just it being the Christmas season. And so, I feel like my brain constantly kind of whirs away with all the things I need to get and organise, and just more in the mood for kind of cosy, easy things. And then also, it's that time of year, it's cold in the UK, and so it feels nice kind of snuggling up under a blanket with a cosier book. So I do have a few sort of cosy reads to talk about, and then I do also have a few books that are sort of my more usual fare. And then I thought I would just chat about that kind of end of year pressure of still wanting to try and squeeze loads of books in the hopes they'll be a favourite of the year, and only having a few days to do that. So the first one I have, these are all library books by the way, is Between Us by Mara McFarlane. I think this is her newest book. She is a contemporary romance author, and I have read 2 or 3 of her previous books. I'm not 100% sure which ones I've read because all the titles are quite similar. I think I've read Last Night and Don't You Forget About Me and maybe Mad About You, although I'm not sure. And I enjoyed them all. I think I haven't read a ton of contemporary romance, but I do tend to prefer the type of contemporary romance that this author writes, because her books are usually a little bit on the longer side. Like this one is pretty long for a contemporary romance. It's around 430 pages. And even though there is a romance as the focal point of the book, she also just deals a lot with issues in the protagonist's life, and that almost takes as much focus as their romantic relationship. And they are usually difficulties with familial relationships or relationships with friends. And I just find them they don't border on that kind of cheesiness that I think romance books sometimes have. This one sounds a bit less romantic than a lot of her other ones. It is about a couple who agree to go for a weekend away. It's like this triple celebration for their friends, but then the woman sees secrets she shared with her partner play out on a TV show that her partner featured in. So she thinks maybe he's been telling her secrets, and starts to make her ask questions about the man she loved. So that sounds like maybe it's about the falling apart of a romance. So I don't know if there will be some other person who steps in so that this can have some type of happy ending. But we'll pick this up, and I've read all of her books in 1 or 2 sittings. I find them sort of compulsively readable. So let me know if you've read any Mara McFarlane, which ones you enjoy, and also if you've read other authors in the kind of contemporary romance space who you think are similar to her writing. And then this next one I stumbled across, as always. I was having a look at what my library had recently purchased on the online app, and I saw this cover and this title and immediately clicked on it. And that is Things We Lose in Waves by Lucy Ayrton. And I just thought that cover and title looked a bit kind of cosy and like the type of thing I could possibly enjoy. It says, Ravensburn is falling into the sea. The little town is perched on a remote cliff, and every day storms are claiming more land, more homes and more livelihoods. The news of her father's sudden death forces Jenny's return to her hometown from London, and she is now responsible for her father's small pub and its staff. Alex and Cy, her former best friend and ex-boyfriend, now a couple. She's stuck living in her childhood home with her boyfriend left in London, and each day that she remains, the town seems to shrink around her. The secrets and unspoken regrets that have come to haunt Jenny are not so easily escaped. In the claustrophobia of Ravensburn, where can she turn? And again, this sounds like it could be quite kind of small town focused, which is something I've been enjoying recently, and focused on kind of a quiet life and quite cosy, which is something I really love. And this, I think, is the new release paperback. It smells that kind of, there's a certain type of books that have that kind of more, I don't know if chemically is the right word, but that's kind of what I want to go with, that I find really nostalgic. And so that is one I would like to read. So again, let me know if you read that one. And this is a much older book, and that is The Country Child by Alison Utley. I'm not actually quite sure when this one came out. Let's have a little look. It was first published in 1931, so this one's almost 100 years old, and this is a children's classic, and it's supposed to be lovely. It is about a young girl who is highly imaginative and solitary, and she lives on a remote hill farm deep in the countryside. And this book follows a year of her life. It's based seasonally, which is something I love. I've read quite a few books that are split into the seasons. I think they tend to work for books that are more rural in setting because you can pay more attention to the changing of the seasons in a more rural location. And I think this sounds glorious. It says it follows the fun of haymaking, a visit to the circus and Christmas celebrations and the farmhouse kitchen, the struggles with nature that each season brings. And it's about a rural childhood based on the author's own life. And I've read the first couple of pages of this, and the nature writing is like already on point. So yeah, this just feels like a nice one to like curl up with in that kind of betwixtmas period, or maybe even a nice cozy one to start the new year with. So I'm feeling like I could really love this one. And these are the type of books I always kind of think about picking up more and then never do. So yeah, I would like to actually get to this one. And then the next one is a recommendation from the lovely Jen Campbell. I've heard Jen talk about this one loads, and recently I heard her talk about this author's other book, A Fortnight in September, and I reserved it at the library, but then it didn't come through until October, so I was like, oh, I kind of want to read it in September, so I cancelled the reservation until like I'll try it again next year. But in the meantime, I was like, oh, I've always been intrigued by this one as well, and that is the Hopkins Manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. So I've heard Jen talk about this one a lot and say that it is obviously an older book, and it is about a man who is living in a world where the moon is about to come crashing into the earth with apocalyptic consequences. And he writes a manuscript about those changing times, and this is that manuscript. This was published in 1939. And I've always been kind of intrigued by that premise, the kind of science fiction book that is much older, but I'd never been like sure that I wanted to read it. But then Jen mentioned this again in the last few months in a video, and she said that actually this book is kind of a small town focus. It's very quiet, and it's about his daily life in this little village. And it isn't so much about this kind of sci-fi apocalyptic event. And I was like, that actually sounds wonderful. This author has a few books that I really like the sound of, so I'm hoping to really enjoy this one and then have some more to pick up. And then I have another kind of rom-com or contemporary romance, and that is Tell Me Everything by Laura Kay. Earlier this year, I read the new release Experience by Kate Young, which was a lesbian romance, and I really enjoyed it. It was actually one of my kind of favourite reading experience of the year, even though it wasn't necessarily one of the best books I read. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and so I wanted to try and pick up more books that were similar to it. I much prefer female romances in my romance fiction. I find that a lot of the kind of traditional stereotypes of masculinity and femininity are really present in romance books, and I just find that all completely unattractive. And so yeah, I much prefer queer romance stories. And this is about somebody who is a therapist whose own life is a complete mess. She is living with her ex, and then this new person arrives on the scene and everything changes. And yeah, I think this is also about like her trying to kind of sort her own life out as well as like this romance. And I've heard good things about Laura Kay as a queer romance writer. And these next few are back to my usual reading fare with some darker themes in them. The first one being Service by Sarah Gilmartin. So I featured this in a TBR video I uploaded earlier this year about dark and twisty literary fiction books. I'll link that above. I have read a couple of those since I uploaded it, so I'm slowly working my way through that list and kind of chipping away at it. And this is the next one I am excited to get to. This sounds like a book I could really, really love. This is told from 3 perspectives, which is something I love. I love multiple POV, and it centres around this awful event where a famous male chef is accused of sexual assault from like various different people, I think. And it is about the fallout of that, told from both his perspective, his wife's perspective, and a woman who previously worked with him, who I think has some kind of complex thoughts about these accusations and maybe some things about her history with him that she's kind of even kept hidden from herself. And it's about that all kind of being Unpeeled. It says, surrounded by the wreckage of the past, their free voices reveal a story of power, complicity, and the courage it takes to face the truth. Yeah, I think that sounds really intriguing. And I also quite enjoy when an author sets their books really firmly in a world, and I think this is going to be really firmly in the kind of restaurant world. And Writers and Lovers by Lily King, in part, was set in that kind of world. The protagonist was a waitress as part of her job, and yeah, I kind of really enjoyed that space, so I'm interested in reading another novel that takes place in it. Then a new release that went straight to paperback. I had this one on hold from the library and it's just come in for me, and that is She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark. This is her first short story collection. I was going to say novel, not her first novel. I've read both of her novels and they are Boy Parts and Penance. I really enjoyed Boy Parts and I loved Penance even more. And I'm intrigued by this. I will say I'm a little bit fearful. I personally love short story collections, so it's always exciting when an author whose work I enjoy releases a short story collection. But I knew that this was kind of a dark collection because it says, unsettling, revelatory and laced with her signature dark humour, Eliza Clark's debut short story collection plumbs the depths of that most basic human feeling, hunger. And I was like, yeah, that sounds a bit twisted. I was fine with both of her books. I will say there was a section in Penance that I started to read right before bed and I had to stop because I did find it too much. And it's perhaps a book, if I'd been pre-warned, I might not have chosen to read it because it did get quite dark for me with some of the topics, but I'm glad I did read it. But I opened this book, as I always do. Whenever I get a book home, I always have a little glance at the first few pages. And I'm always interested to see with short story collections how many stories there are in them, because I'm someone who prefers slightly, like, I don't like short story collections that are like 6 pages. So I'm always happy to see when there's between like 8 and 12 stories in a collection because it means they're not too short. But yeah, when I opened it, it says content note. This collection contains themes and subject matters some readers may find disturbing. If you would like more information before proceeding, please check the detailed content guide on page 221 ahead of reading. Now, I think it's good that those type of notes are included because certainly there's some things that some people just don't want to read because it'll be really upsetting for them and triggering. But it also makes me quite frightened to read it because it feels like, is it that this author's just being really thoughtful or the publisher's being really thoughtful, or is it that this is like way worse than what I usually read and therefore they kind of like felt that they had to put it there? I don't know. So if you've read this, let me know. What I'll say is I can read, I don't know if that's true, because I select what I read based on certain things I don't want to read about. There are a couple of books, short story collections, where certain things have stuck with me perhaps more than I wished, and I perhaps wished that I hadn't ever read them. And yeah, so I don't know if I want to kind of add to that list, not quite sure. So let me know, have you read this? How bad is it? And one thing I guess I'll say that I personally just can't read is I'm not very good with gore. I used to faint quite a lot as a teenager in like at school in science lessons. There was a history lesson where we learn about the Victorian operating theatres. Yeah, I used to faint quite regularly. I've got it under control, but it's still something I struggle with. And so yeah, if there's any stories that kind of go within that realm, I may have to skip those ones. So I should just, what I think I'm going to do is get Johnny to look at the contents, the bit at the back, and tell me, he knows what I wouldn't want to read, tell me which ones to not read. I could just read them, but then I'm fearful that they'll just be fine things and I've kind of spoiled the stories for myself. I don't know. What's your opinion on this? I think it's good that it's included though, because it gives everybody the opportunity to just make that decision, like what personally works for them. The next one I have is Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. So I've been reading Claire Fuller's books in order, and it's a bit of a weird situation I have here with Claire Fuller because I read her debut novel, Her Endless Numbered Days, a few years ago when it came out. And it is a book I should have loved from the perspective of a young girl set in a forest in the middle of nowhere. That's all I'll say. I didn't. I felt that it kind of reached for certain things and never quite met them, and I felt quite let down by it. And I felt similarly about her next book, which was called Swimming Lessons. Now, I really liked the vibe of Swimming Lessons. Her books kind of have this vibe of kind of, I don't want to say coziness, but because they're very kind of British and rural. Yeah, they do feel slightly cosy, but there's always this kind of edge of darkness to them, this kind of hidden seam that feels kind of a bit nasty and makes you feel kind of unsure as you're reading it, and that's something I really like. But yeah, then I found swimming lessons, like, I remember books I've read, I remember them really well, I remember plots and what happened. What I remember about swimming lessons is the description of the house and the garden. There's like a building at the end of the garden. I really remember that, but I remember nothing about the plot, and that's quite bad because, like I said, I'm good at remembering books. But then I read Bitter Orange this year, and I definitely enjoyed it more. It's like a 3.5 stars for me. But again, I felt like she has the writing ability to write something amazing, and then where she goes with the plot always feels slightly less than she's kind of prepared you for. It feels like she really ups the ante, so you think it's going to be like, oh my God, and then it's kind of more like a fizzle out. But yeah, I'm intrigued by the premise of all of her books, so I keep going. So Unsettled Ground is the one I heard the best things about. Like, I've heard so many people rave about this. I've had so many recommendations for this book. This does sound like the type of book I would love and adore, because it's about an old brother and sister. They're twins, they're 51 years old, and they've always lived with their mother in a ramshackle cottage, and basically just living off what they can find, what they can kill animal-wise. Then she dies and they realise, we don't know how to survive, we don't know how to cope, like, what do we do? And it's about them, they find themselves pushed further to the margins as their mother's secrets begin to unravel, putting everything they thought they knew about their lives at stake. It says, and this sounds brilliant, shows us our land as it really is, a place of shelter and cruelty, innocence and experience. And yeah, I love a ramshackle cottage. I love a book about people kind of living closer to nature, and I love family secrets, sibling dynamics, all those things. So this could be a book I love, but I thought that about all of her books. But yeah, still I'm continuing, and I'm also interested. I think she has just one more book after this called The Memory of Animals, I think. And again, I think that one sounds really interesting too. So her plots really pull me in. But yeah, we shall see. And then lastly from the library, I have a real heavy, chunky read, and that is Native Nations and Millennium in North America by Kathleen Duval. Now this is a big boy. This is around 700 pages, although about 150 pages of that are notes, because this is a non-fiction book, of course. This is one I'd heard of, it's come out recently, and I really wanted to read it. I thought I'd have to read it on Kindle because it's not published in the UK. But I've mentioned this before, my library has an American section, because we had a US airbase here during World War II, I believe, and it receives funding, and they purchase American publications basically, and they mainly focus on non-fiction. And so yeah, I realised they'd purchased this one, was super happy to see. I've read a couple of books on this topic now. I'm kind of forever searching for a book about this topic. So I've read a few that are more specific about the history of Indigenous people in North America, that focus in on like one aspect of it, and then I've read a couple that are broader, like this one. And yeah, never quite found what I wanted to find for different reasons. Sometimes I don't like the writing style. With one of them, I found that it was really focused on men, and there was a very little discussion of women, and some of the focus was kind of really broad and dry, and some of it was really kind of narrow and too specific. So yeah, I'm intrigued. This is written by a woman, which is good, but having got this one, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think she is an Indigenous writer. And so that, yeah, unsure, because I prefer to read this from an Indigenous perspective. But she is a professor who is a professor of history at the University of North Carolina, and she has written quite a few books about this history. So this is going to be quite broad focus. I've had a look at the what is it called? Oh my God, contents page. And it looks like it's going to be told in chronological order. Sometimes these type of books are chronological, sometimes they're kind of theme based. I find theme more interesting, but chronological more helpful. Like, it makes more sense to me when it's chronological. So we shall see. This might be one I pick up in January. My non-fiction reading in 2024 has been abysmal. That is something we will talk about in a kind of end of the year wrap up. This might be a good one to kind of start the new year off with. And then lastly, so I've got all those library books, and like I said, part of me is just in the mood to carry on with some kind of cozier reads and kind of focus on those first few I mentioned. And when you think about it realistically, there's like 9 days left this year. I am busy Christmas Day and Boxing Day with family. And to be honest, Johnny and I usually spend that period between Christmas and New Year just playing loads of board games, which is something we love. But yeah, I will manage to fit some reading in. So part of me just wants to kind of stick to those cozier books. And then another part of me wants to aim for only reading books that I think could be 5 stars, to kind of squeeze a couple more in. And the best way for me to do that would be for me to actually finish my project that I did this year of trying to predict my 5-star reads. I have got 4 books left, and it irks me a little bit if I carry this over to another year. I would prefer it to be neat and finished. And I'm super excited about these books, but then there's another part of me that doesn't want to rush these 4 books that are all about quite serious, perhaps bleak topics. So yeah, maybe I'll manage to squeeze a couple in, and then I'll start the new year off with the other couple, and that would be really cool to kind of start the new year off with some 5 stars. So yeah, I'm kind of swinging at the moment between sticking with cozy, easy reads for this kind of stressful, busy time of year, or reading books that I think will be 5 stars. So the few I have left, I'm just going to kind of hold these up because I've shown you them before. I'm really annoyed actually because I've just noticed that this is stained and wobbly. It looks like something's been spilt on it. That definitely wasn't me. Oh, actually, it was me. I remember I knocked over a glass of orange squash on the floor over there, and this book was in a stack. That was me. I was about to blame. I actually sniffed earlier because I was worried one of my cats had peed on it, which is something they've never done. So yeah. Then we have this one. And this is the one I think I would actually like to read. I've heard amazing things about this one, and I'm going to pick this one up on audiobook when I read it, because this is set in New Zealand, and like, yeah, I just want to make sure I get the most out of it and like hear the accent and all that. So yeah, I've heard amazing things about this one. Then we have Between Dog and Wolf by Christina Goodchaver-Newbury. Again, this one sounds amazing, and yeah, I just feel like I could really enjoy this one. And then the other one I have on Kindle, and that is Cherry Beach by Laura McPhee Brown. So yeah, I think I could love all these because I put them as 5-star predictions, but they're all quite bleak, I think. And so yeah, I don't know if I want to kind of end the year on that, although that is kind of what I love to read. So I would love to know if you have any thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned. And also, yeah, intrigued in how you feel about the end of the year time, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. Like, do you want to try and squeeze some more 5-star reads in, or do you just want to read what's kind of easier and cozy, or do you feel really kind of conflicted, which is effectively how I feel? But yeah, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were on them, and anything else you want to let me know down below in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.